Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Learned Society of the Czech Republic, please allow me to warmly welcome our distinguished guest, Professor Gilles Kepel de Paris, to today's ceremonial Palacký lecture and the presentation of the Learned Society's Medal for Merits in the Development of Science. Professor Gilles Kepel is a French political scientist, sociologist, and Arabist who specializes in contemporary Arab world, including radical Islam. Through his publications, as well as his radio and television appearances, he helps shed light on the sources of today's painful conflicts in the Middle East and the dangers they posed to Western civilization and the global order. As we learn in his autobiography, or the biography of his family, Child of Bohemia, Enfant de Bohème, 2022, Gilles Kepel comes from a Czech-French family. His father, Milan Kepel, was the first translator of Václav Havel's plays into French, and he also adapted Hašek, the good soldier Švejk, for the stage. While his grandfather, the Czechoslovak diplomat Rudolf Kepel, was the first to translate Guillaume Apollinaire's poems into Czech, even before Karel Čapek. After studying philosophy, English and Arabic, Gilles Kepel also earned a degree in political science in Paris in 1980 and went on to pursue the doctorate in Cairo. His dissertation on the Muslim Brotherhood was published under the title Le Prophète et Pharaon in 1984 and represents one of the first analyses of militant Islam ever done. As a researcher at the CNRS in Paris, Gilles Kepel focuses on development of the Islam in France, beginning in 1985. He summarized his findings in the book Les banlieues de l'Islam, 1987, in which he demonstrates the growing influence on the Muslim Brotherhood in the Parisian suburbs. This was followed by the book La Revanche de Dieu, translated into more than 20 languages, including Czech, Boží pomsta, 1996, which compares political religious movements arising from Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and later the study À l'Ouest de l'Allah, which examines African-American Muslims in the United States. In 1995, Gilles Kepel was appointed Directeur de Recherche at the CNRS in Paris and later became professor at Columbia University in New York, where he prepared his study on the Islamic world in Indonesia and Africa, titled Jihad, Expansion et déclin de l'islamisme. In 2001, he became professor of political science at Sciences Po in Paris, following the closure of the center dedicated to Middle Eastern studies. He was appointed a senior member of the research institute, l'Institut Universitaire de France, in 2010, and served as a visiting scholar at the London School of Economics from 2009 to 2010. In 2016, he became professor at the École normale supérieure in Paris, specializing in Middle Eastern studies. His book on the Arab Spring revolutions, Passion arabe, won the Prix Pétrarque de France Culture and was named the best book in 2013 by Le Monde. Its counterpart, Passion française, examines the first generation of French politicians to emerge from Muslim immigrant communities. His work, Terreur dans l'Hexagone, Genèse du Jihad français, devoted to jihadist attacks in France, was honored by the magazine Revue de Deux Mondes in 2016 and soon became a bestseller. At the same time, however, it made Professor Kepel himself the target of a terrorist attack. The attack was aimed not only at Kepel's books, which were to be burned, but also at him personally. Gilles Kepel drew on this tragic experience for his study Sortir du chaos, les crises de Méditerranée au Moyen-Orient, in Czech, Cesta z chaosu, krize ve Středomoří a na Blízkém východě, 2022. dedicated to the Middle East since the 1973 war, which brought not only the sharp rise of oil prices, but also the spread of jihad. Here, Kepel charts events in Afghanistan as well as the Arab uprisings beginning in Tunisia and ending in Syria. He also addresses the issue of jihadism from a legal perspective in his last book, co-authored with the lawyer Jean-François Ricard, Antiterrorisme, la tragique des djihadistes, 2025. His two recent books, Holocaust, Israël, Gaza et la guerre contre l'Occident, and Le bouleversement du monde, d'après 7 octobre, partially translated into Czech as Holocausty, Israel, Gaza a válka proti Západu, 2024. Gilles Kepel devotes to Israel's ongoing war against Hamas following the terrorist attack of October 7, 2023. Kepel concludes the second of these works with the cautionary statement that the events of October 7th and what followed them hastened the collapse of the world order. Unfortunately, this prediction seems to be coming true in the events we have witnessed since then. Today's lecture by Professor Kepel will also focus on these current events. Before that, however, we would like to present him with a medal for his contributions to the advancement of science, which was awarded to him by the Learned Society of the Czech Republic in 2025. I would therefore like to ask the president of the Learned Society of the Czech Republic, Professor Martin Löbl, to present the medal.
Perfect. Thank you, Lenka. It's my great honor and pleasure indeed to deliver the medal, and I'm looking forward extremely to your lecture.
Děkuji.
Oh, bravo. And it's a small gift. Bravo.
I would like to extend my congratulations to Professor Gilles Kepel and invite him to take the floor and speak on the topic of the 2026 war in the Middle East and its global and European outreach. Monsieur le professeur, cher Gilles, je vous invite à prendre la parole.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I am both honored and ashamed. Ashamed because I cannot say much in Czech except for Dobrý večer, Dobronoc, yet not yet, and Děkuji. My father never taught me Czech at the time. You know, those days of assimilation, he was most interested in my speaking French well, which I hope I managed to do after so many years, than teaching me Czech, but it was always a great pleasure for me to come here. And while Lenka was reading this sort of epitaph, I thought I was dead, and it was on my, I'm still, maybe it's a voice from the dead, who knows, whatever. Whenever you were mentioning that, I remembered that, you know, my life has, the scansions of my life were those books. I don't remember the dates, but, oh yes, this was when I, and actually when I was writing The Revenge of God, this was the first time I came to the Czech Republic as a scholar, and in the church of my saint, Svaté Jilji, Saint Gilles, nearby. This is where I met Dominique Duca at the time, before he was Archbishop, and he was still a leftist by some sort at the time. And we had a lot of things together, and it was, and the Czech Republic was present in this book. And when the attacks in Paris, the terrorist attacks of November 13, 2015 happened, I was staying at the French embassy in Prague. The day after, I was to follow on to Bratislava, which I never did because my publisher, Gallimard, who's known to be very stingy, nevertheless paid for a first-class ticket on the first plane from Prague to Paris so that I could do my sort of parroting role on the media for those commentaries. So I am very honored to be awarded this medal. It comes for me as a scholar also as something of praise because my predecessor was no one else than Marc Mézard, who was the director of the Serious Scholar. He's a physicist, not a physician, not as myself, and a humble social scientist. And he was director of École normale supérieure, and he was the one who brought me in École normale supérieure. Right after he left, I was fired from it. So this is a man to whom I... thank you also, for as someone from Czech descent, of course, and I'm sure my grandfather Rudolf Kepel would be very proud to see me here tonight. So, in his tribute, thank you all, and thank you to the Academy. Thank you, dear Lenka. Actually, this was a very topical decision to have this lecture on this theme today. I wonder whether you have any connections either with the White House or with the Revolutionary Guards of the Islamic Republic, but actually it shows that the Czech Republic is still the center of the world, which not everybody knows, but I'm convinced of it for personal reasons, of course, for Blut reasons. I would say that the world order that started here and in this part of the world in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Velvet Revolution, as far as you're concerned, and other things, is probably now beyond us. What we're seeing taking place around the Straits of Hormuz shows the end of a rather bizarre period in history, which was a period of, to some extent, organized peace from 1990 to the present, so that would be 35 years or something like that. Probably comparable to the middle 19th century, from the 1850s to the 1880s, where, with the growth of capitalism before the wars of the end of the century, there was a sort of comparable period. And international law, which was to a large extent considered a given after the demise of the Soviet Union, because in a way the world was quote-unquote benevolently functioning under the aegis of the West, of the US in particular, and of NATO, a NATO that was not functioning as opposed to the Warsaw Pact, because there's no Warsaw Pact anymore, but it was sort of taking care of global peace, even though things were done in its name that not everybody agreed with. But nevertheless, at the time, the navies of the world were not very busy. And when you were on an aircraft carrier or a destroyer or what have you, you were just not having fun, but you were enjoying life. There was not much to do over the seas because it worked as it should have. Piracy had disappeared to a large extent. There was no Soviet bloc anymore, and and trade flourished, and particularly trade routes developed from China to the West, either through the Pacific towards America or through the Indian Ocean, then the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean towards Europe. This area of sort of globalized modernization that took place after the fall of communism has now reached an end. And the presidency of the second presidency of Donald Trump in America is but the most salient characteristic of this sea change, if I may say so, that we're seeing, because this is a change coming from the seas. How did this this system get into existence? How did we get there? So, as Lenka mentioned, that I'm such an old man that I've done so many things. Let me give a first retrospective glance at how we got there, and then let's try to not take the lessons of what is happening now, because I do not know, even though I pretend I do, but that's good for TV, not for a learned society's audience. And then we'll, of course, open for a talk. So I have another half hour to do that, so I'll try to divide my time more or less equally into two. I believe that the episode that started with the massive bombing and the precise bombing of the Iranian presidency and Supreme Guide residence in the morning of February 28th of this year of 2026, which to some extent harbored the illusion that with the decapitation, the beheading to some extent of the system, the Iranian Republic would disappear, and that the 47-year parenthesis that had started with the advent to power of Ayatollah Khomeini, who came back from Paris in February '97 to succeed, to be a successor state to the Pahlavi Empire, and build this sort of theocratic cum revolutionary movement and state, we believed at the time, many of them, including myself, that it would be coming to an end. And that it would, in a way, reinforce this sort of global world system under the aegis of the United States. But it's proved to be the contrary. So you do not have to trust everything I say, because I was totally mistaken on that day. I was not the only one to be mistaken. I mean, most of us were, but this is not an excuse for someone who pretends he should be considered as a scholar. What happened on the 20th of February of this year, to a large extent, was the continuation of a sort of premonitory act, which was quite difficult to interpret at the time also, but which maybe in retrospect is more meaningful. That is the raid cum pogrom that Hamas inflicted on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, which was a sort of staggering phenomenon, with the slaughtering of 2,000 Israelis living by the Gaza border, many of them leftist Israelis living in kibbutzim and friendly as they could be, to the extent that they could, to the Palestinians. The taking of 251 hostages, something which of course goes against what we are used about in modern warfare or in so-called civilized warfare, because taking hostages and treating them like they were treated is something that is more reminiscent of the crusades, of wars of the past, than they are of today's behavior, even in warfare. And to some extent, this is something that also showed that we can live in a world where contemporary behavior and modes of behavior that seem to pertain to the past can be mingled. Now, what happened on the 7th of October 2023? Yahya Sinwar, who was at the time the leader of the Hamas Palestinian Islamist movement, for Harakat al-Muqawmat al-Islamiyya, that is the movement of the Islamic resistance in Arabic, decided to inflict this daring attack on Israel. Some say because he foolishly thought that the Israelis would be so shocked by this violence and by this awe that this would lead to, you know, the corroding of the moral fiber of Israel. People would leave, and it would be the beginning of the end of the state of Israel or of the Zionist state or project on Palestinian land, in his reading. Some of us, including myself, I would say, after wondering why Hamas did so, believed that it was probably Sinwar acting on his own, because it was so audacious that, in a way, it would lead to a number of problems for the global mentor of this proxy system of the Islamic Republic in the region, and it would be more of a liability than an asset for the Islamic Republic. And as a matter of fact, after some time, when the image of Israel was ruined worldwide by the repression in Gaza because of we don't exactly know how many people were killed by the bombings ordered by Netanyahu, but the sort of agreed upon estimate is approximately 70,000 people. So this led Israel to be put to accusation in the International Criminal Court, in the International Court of Justice, and you know all those issues. It's also reinforced the rise of a competitor, a world competing system to the sort of globalized modernity, which was starting to call itself the Global South, i.e. Reinventing the geography of the geopolitics of today's world until 1989. As you know, from 1945 to 1989, we had a world system that, and you were on the other side, and this is why I could not visit the country of my ancestors for quite some time, which was the East-West divide, epitomized by the Berlin Wall, communism against capitalism, or the Soviet world against the free world, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. Then, after 1989, when the Soviet system disappeared and you had this sort of globalized modernity, cranks started to take place within this modernity, and those cranks are developing now into something which takes big shape. And instead of having an east-west divide, you know, you have a shift this way. The east becomes, the former east to some extent becomes the south, and the former west becomes the north. So it's the global south, and when in the parlance global south, global means something that has the capacity to express the values of the world, the emerging powers, which is rightful in its own sense, vis-à-vis the North, which is the evil, decaying, and post-colonial world. And in this worldview, in this Weltanschauung, what you have is a rereading of the past, i.e. evil was represented by colonialism, the colonial expansion, and people stemming from the former colonized world, whether their descendants remained in this part of the world or whether they migrated in the former northern countries like Muslims in Europe and others, embody the values, the rightful values of the world. And to a large extent, what we see unfolding around the Strait of Hormuz today is an implementation of that worldview that was kicked open to a large extent on October 7th, 2023, with the Hamas attack. Now back to this event. After Israel got the upper hand militarily at a very big moral expense vis-à-vis the world, global as it is, and parts also of the northern governments, to use their parlance. Then there were a number of daring and daunting attacks by the Israelis on the proxies system of the Islamic Republic, starting with the destruction of Hezbollah in Lebanon in September 2024. And at the time, most people, including against myself, were convinced that Hezbollah had been eradicated for good with the famous beeper and pager attacks, which will be taught probably in intelligence training programs for the 20 years to be. And no one expected that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards would be able to recreate their capacity, their striking capacity, as had been demonstrated over that last month. But at the time, so it looked like it was a big blow on the proxy system. Then the Assad regime, that was also a proxy for Iran, failed and was replaced, something that was strange by the sort of moral standards of the West, the pro-Shia and pro-Iranian regime in Damascus, was replaced by a Sunni regime, the head of which was a former jihadist with his hands soaked in blood. But, you know, he dressed differently. President Erdogan gave him his tailor, his personal tailor, to dress him up, and he has a nice tie now. Huh? And then the Iraqi militias, the pro-Iraqi militias, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, looked like they were significantly enfeebled. And finally, in June 2025, the 12-day war took place, where the nuclear capacity of Iran was significantly, if not fatally, damaged. And so many people thought that at the time, so this attack on October 7th, 2023 was something that would not be successful, that Iran was unable to take advantage, that it was enfeebled, that it didn't have its proxy system to protect itself, and so on and so forth, which proved to be wrong, because as we saw now, the Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic, seems to still have some strength. Let's wait until a few minutes so we examine if the strength is real or fantasy. Now, let's go back into time a little also. To understand, to trace from the late 1980s and even before onwards, how the disruption started. Actually, October 7th, 2023 is an event that took place exactly a half century and 1 day after October 6, 1973. October 6, 1973 was a very important moment because it also set forward, even at the time when the USSR was still around and you already had an East-West divide, a new area of strength in the world system and in the world economy for the oil exporting countries. October 1973 was the Yom Kippur or Ramadan or October War between Israel and its neighbors, mostly Syria and Egypt at the time. And the Egyptians and the Syrians took the opportunity of Israeli fasting of Kippur, which disorganized the Israeli army, in order to launch a surprise attack, actually at the bequest and with the help of the Soviets, of the Russians at the time. And after a few days, there was a significant military counteroffensive by the Israelis. Their army went into Golan, got 40 kilometers to Damascus, crossed the Suez Canal, and suddenly stopped at kilometer 101 from Cairo on a phone call from the American presidency, who told them stop, because King Faisal of Saudi Arabia had set an oil embargo from Arab countries on all states that supported and helped and stood by Israel during the offensive. This led, and it would be followed soon by the fall of the Shah of Iran 6 years later, led to a massive oil crisis. If you remember well, and at the time you were spared by that because you lived in the Soviet paradise, but we living in the Western hell suffered from it very much. Oil prices quadrupled in a few years, and we are not at this stage now. They have less than double, they fluctuate, and the situation is quite different because at the time there was an enormous dependency on oil, which has been sort of reduced because of the plurality of alternative energies, nuclear, and what have you. And also because most oil at the time in the West, not in the USSR, but in the West, came from the Middle East. It's been highly diversified now, and the US is a net exporter of oil due to fracking. And so the consequences are less severe of the crisis we're now living through than the ones in the 1970s. But nevertheless, October 73 was very important symbolically because it was the rise of the Middle East, of the Arab and Muslim world, and particularly of the oil petromonarchies of the Arabian Peninsula as a major power, financially, essentially. And up to very recently, up to this war, their power went unhindered. When Donald Trump made his little trip with his shopping list after he was re-elected, he traveled to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Emirate of Qatar, and the UAE, and said that in order for the US to protect militarily those countries, he asked them to give him altogether $1 trillion. And so they promised to make investments of that magnitude in the USA. Hopefully for them, they did not invest all that trillion because it would have been lost, and because, you know, the sort of military insurance policy did not work out, because the US were incapable to protect the Arabian Peninsula countries and states, oil-producing and gas-producing countries, against Iranian attacks. And what was all the more striking was that the Western Hemisphere weapons, or the whatever, we don't know how to call them, say the American, Western European and the like weaponry, is based on extremely sophisticated and expensive weapons and munitions. Interceptors, Patriots, THAADs and the like are worth approximately $3 million each. And you need to use one $3 million Patriot to intercept the course of 1,000 or 15,000 drone that can destroy a data center in Saudi Arabia worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And this asymmetric war of the poor against the rich to some extent, which for the time being the rich has been unable to win as of today, is something which is very striking as a sort of new balance or the new unbalance of the world system, and which is plunging those oil-rich countries that became rich precisely 50 years ago on the aftermath of October 1973 in a very, very deep crisis, a security crisis, but also a liquidity crisis, because one day the present belligerence will stop. I cannot foresee how exactly, but it should stop one day or another. The oil-producing countries will have to rebuild unless they suffer from, particularly in Saudi Arabia, domestic consequences, severe domestic consequences, which are going to be a threat for the powers that be and the regimes. And so they will have to pull a lot of the money they have invested abroad in order to rebuild their own country, which will lead probably to a liquidity crisis in the West. But anyway, so going back again to 1973 to some extent, you know, and symbolically, Hamas decided probably that it would be more or less on the same day, because as the Egyptians and the Syrians in 73 had used Yom Kippur as a means for, you know, to exert a surprise, to maximize the surprise effect on the Israelis, and you know, it was already the weapon of the poor because the Israelis were far better equipped. By the same token, Yahya Sinwar used the a Jewish festival, which I had never heard about, I have to tell you, the Simchat Torah festival, to say the glorification of the Torah festival, which leads to a few days off, particularly for religious soldiers, which diminished the capacity of the Israeli army to be alert. And all the more so as in the 50 years from 73 to 2023, the sociology of Israel and its armed forces has gone through massive change. The development of religious movements and Orthodox Jewish movements in Israel, whether they be Haredim, the fearing God, who do not do their military service, and the religious Zionists who not only do their military service, but have become now the sort of special forces and combat forces of the Israeli army. They are the most aggressive, and they have a religious vision behind that, and a political vision, i.e. Greater Israel, and so on and so forth. All those elite forces were the ones who were not there because it was Simchat Torah. So anyway, the from 1973 to 2023, the nature of the Israeli state had changed from inside to a large extent. Now, what was so important was that all that opened the way to another event a few years later. That would be the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, which also led to a worsening of the oil crisis at the time, because Iran, Shah's Iran and Iran today, has the second biggest reserves of gas in the world after the USSR, or Russia now today, and other countries. So, in 1979, the advent of the Islamic Republic, with the public humiliation of America, the American diplomats that were arrested, that were paraded, handcuffed and blindfolded, and those images were exhumed recently when the US lost a plane and 2 pilots above Iran, if you remember. One of the big issues for the Iranians was to try to find at least the second pilot, and it was feared in America that he would be exhibited on Iranian television as a hostage, and that would have been extremely detrimental to Donald Trump's narrative, and they used a huge amount of air, manpower, and intelligence and whatever to find him and retrieve him to the US. The real story has not yet been told. I mean, we're suffused with a narrative which is produced by the US, but one day we'll know. At least we'll know better. And so, the advent of the Islamic Republic was something that would have, it looked like, a regional issue, but it had enormous consequences. 2 of them. One was that for the first time in modern history, an Islamic revolutionary stake took shape. At the time, the USSR was quite interested because the Islamic Republic was the first modern blend of what we now call Islamo-leftism or Islamo-gauchisme in France. Khomeini managed to gather a group of people who were, where there were both religious people and the Shia clerics and so on and so forth, and leftists, Marxists, the Communist Party of Iran, and a number of splinter groups under his aegis. And therefore, it was an Islamic revolution. It was anti-imperialist to some extent. But instead of being Maoist or Marxist, it was religious. And this led to a number of shockwaves, even within the Western intelligentsia. Michel Foucault, the known French writer who was a homosexual militant and an advocate of gay rights, visited Iran and praised the holy man, le saint homme, that Khomeini was. He came there with his boyfriend and maybe not knowing that at the same time homosexuals were being thrown out from walls in Iran and a number of Islamic countries for the sin of homosexuality. But nevertheless, so this was a sort of crucible that came into existence that would develop this sort of blend of Islam that was perceived until then mostly as a reactionary phenomenon. You know, for Marxists and leftists, Islam was the most reactionary of all religions. And suddenly it became, through third worldism and with this blend of revolution, it became Islamic revolutionary, if you want. Something which was going to start to unsettle the whole system. So you had that on the one hand. And B, the USSR saw with interest the development of the Khomeini's revolution because they were joining forces against the West. Though later on they would be would be compelled to go back to reality because Marxists in Tehran would be sent to the gallows or fusilated or what have you. And it also, strangely enough, this was the trick of history, la ruse de l'histoire, it was also something that would prepare secretly the demise of the Soviet Union. Because when I mentioned that in Prague, of course, people in Prague think that it's the Velvet Revolution that destroyed the Soviet Union, that it's Václav Havel, and my father being the first translator of his plays, you know, I may have vicariously played a role in that even myself, but it's not the case. What destroyed the Soviet Union was a phenomenon that took place in year 1989, in February of that year, and that exposed the Red Army as a paper tiger, i.e. the defeat of the Soviet Army and the Red Army in Afghanistan, and the fact that they had to leave after they were defeated in Afghanistan in 1989. So they were exposed as being nothing, and Gorbachev had nothing else to say than to start glasnost and perestroika and let the wall of Berlin be destroyed. How did this phenomenon take place? This also has its origin in the region because in the year 1979, which started with the Khomeini's trip back from Paris to Tehran and the advent of the Islamic Revolution and Islamic Republic, there was another event in October of that year, which was the siege of Mecca, the Grand Mosque of Mecca, by Islamist revolutionaries who were Sunnis, who, as far as we know, had no real links with the Iranian revolutionaries, but who were entrusted with the idea that, you know, the Sauds were just stooges to America. They had forgotten the green book for the greenback, the dollar, and they, instead of worshipping the square Kaaba, they were worshipping the oil barrel. And that sent shockwaves. Actually, the French gendarmerie sort of put an end to the siege in Mecca at the time. But that sent a shockwave in the Sunni world. This was a time of great disruption for the West, and this is when Moscow chose to invade Afghanistan on the Christmas Day in 1979. Thinking, I mean, they wanted to replace one faction of the pro-Soviet party in Kabul by another, thinking they could do that, they could expand beyond the Yalta borders using the weakness of the West at the time, and that engineered a reaction by the US, which would be called Jihad in Afghanistan. So this jihad in Afghanistan was a means to kill two birds with one stone. The first one was a means to reassert the importance of Sunni Islam, which was perceived as the time, mostly the one in the Arabian Peninsula, as an ally of the West, as opposed to what was happening in Iran. Now, Khomeini said that he was the embodiment of the exploited masses of the Muslim world, and the US would would develop a counter-argument and say, we train and equip, and the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the others pay for jihadi resistance against the atheist communists who have attacked and conquered the Islamic land of Afghanistan. So you had those two narratives. Who is going to free the land of Islam from communism? And is it the Sunnis or the Shias, the Iranians or the pro-American Saudis? So the war lasted approximately 10 years. At the end of the war, it was clear that the Iranians had lost because the Saudi paid for an American trained and equipped Afghan jihadis had ousted the Soviet troops, the Red Army, from Afghanistan. And so at the time, the US thought they had met both their objectives. They had weakened the Iranians because the other ones had won, and they had sent a final blow to the Soviet system. The day the Red Army left Afghanistan was February 15, 1989. No one remembers that date. And I used to mention when I still taught at Sciences Po, and I had crowds in the theater, 200-300 students more. And I said, okay, you don't remember. And I was already 34 at the time. They were not born usually. And I was an Arabist. I knew the area, but even myself didn't notice. Why is it? Because I was focused on what happened the day before. So everybody looked at his or her shoes, not to be said what happened on that day. And then at the time I would use to say a blushing young female student would say, but now because of political correctness I am not allowed to say that. So say, they would say, you have to say there and there, it's a plural. They said, sir, it was Valentine's Day. I said, yes, it was Valentine's, but it's not the right answer. It was Khomeini's fatwa against Salman Rushdie's satanic verses. What is the French guy talking about? He just pulled the rug under the feet of the Americans and the Sunni jihadists. Suddenly, it appeared that at the global level, the one who was championing Muslims who were humiliated by the West, because Rushdie's book was published in the West, and there was a part of the book that was describing the wives of the prophets as whores, and himself reigning on a brothel in Mecca, in a place called Jahiliyyah, which was another name for Mecca. So he was offending Islam, he was offending the Prophet, and then he should be punished. And you know, sentencing to death, someone who, even though his name was Salman Rushdie, I mean, a name that sounds Muslim, but the guy was a resident, and I believe at the time already a subject or citizen of the UK, being sentenced to death in the name of a fatwa of a medieval judgment, placed from Tehran by this aging man, was sort of an earthquake, you know. This would never have happened. This was unthinkable of. And that it opened the breach to Islamist terrorism in the West, from Salman Rushdie to other victims, not necessarily of the Shias, but also of the Sunnis. And you know, when my country and others were devastated by Islamic terrorism from the late 1990s to mid-1990s to the present. And I was myself sentenced to death by ISIS in 2016 and had to live under police protection for a few years. So this was something that was extremely important on the one hand. And on the other hand, it led to the demise of the Soviet Union, because definitely there were a number of things happening in Czechoslovakia at the time, in Poland, and dissident movements and samizdat and whatever. And I remember my father would send me to see Karel Bartošek in the place where the primary school under which he had taken shelter to write his pamphlets against the regime and so on and so forth. This was not of the same magnitude at what had happened in Afghanistan. It's also true that the Soviet system was exhausted because they could not compete with the West in the competition for the warheads and the missiles and ICBMs, and all this is true. But the final blow was Afghanistan, was the Red Army becoming a paper tiger, right? So in that, the reason I took some time to deal with that in depth was to try to show you how things happening in the Middle East, to some extent through the Soviet system at the time, which extended on the one hand towards Afghanistan because it was bordering Afghanistan at the time, the USSR, to here, to the Berlin Wall. What kind of interconnection there is at the two ends of the system, something which people usually do not see because they were focused on the East-West rivalry, but this East-West rivalry also had a very important Middle Eastern leg. And so this is something which is also happening now. The blockades of the throttling of the Straits of Hormuz is definitely something which does not only have a local or even regional consequence. And one thing, and I will, if you give me another 5 minutes, is that okay? I will end there, is the way the Iranians survived the beheading or the decapitation process on the 28th of February. On the one hand, they clearly had prepared for that for a long time. They had accumulated stockpiles of drones, which were scattered all over the country. And even though the Israelis and the Americans had managed to kill the supreme guide of the time, Khamenei, and many of his ministers, advisors, heads of whatever, nevertheless the system was bunkerized enough and functioned in a sort of he was mosaic based, as the metaphor came, i.e. they had disseminated centers of command everywhere that were fairly independent. It was a sort of, it was network based, it was not pyramidal, as strange as it may sound. And so the Iranians were able to launch a number of projectiles, and particularly cheap drones that were easy and quick to replace and make, not only against Israel, and also missiles against Israel, which managed, many of them, to reach their targets. So this was the sort of mosaic dimension of their domestic defense, but also to deal with a new type of war, which makes us understand that, as I said at the beginning, shows that we are not in the same world system that we were before. Without declaring war on their neighbors, in the GCC, in the Gulf Cooperation Council, those oil-rich petro-monarchies, they targeted them. And they sent drones on refined gas and oil refineries, on pipelines, on oil terminals, on data centers, and something which no one had paid much attention to before the war, and the transition to post-oil, and particularly for countries like Saudi Arabia, where there are 35 million inhabitants in Saudi Arabia, they have to do something, and the Arabian Peninsula can provide cheap oil because cost of extraction of a barrel of oil in Saudi Arabia is around $2, I think. So there's a big difference between the price and, but now they cannot export it. But they can provide cheap oil to corporations which are located on their territory, and also you need a lot of land, and yet they have desert. So this was, strangely enough, the paradise of data centers, which allows your iPhone to tell you everything and to translate from Czech to Slovak easily, or to other languages, is largely due to the fact that there are data centers in desert places with access to cheap oil. And this system was destroyed, this sort of huge stepping stone for, not stepping stone, but escalation for the post-internet revolution, or whatever, the IA revolution, was halted by a $15,000 drone falling on a multi-billion data center in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE. Something very strange, very unforeseen. And this was done by the Iranians, like hostage-taking in the past, without declaring war. I mean, they put themselves outside the rules of the world that had started in 1989 to a large extent, okay? So, what I was trying to show in this presentation was that even though social scientists, or former social scientists, because I'm not an academic, my only relation to academia, when I put on my glasses, because I thought that hopefully it's a canets, which is my totem animal, and it's a lion, the lion of Bohemia. So next time, if you if I live another life, tell your successors that, you know, they'll provide me a canets with a crown. Or a divojak. I never know whether I'm a canets or divojak, but I'm in between, probably. French canets. And therefore, you know, I guess that as academics or former academics, but you can't change yourself completely, even if you try. In my case, I believe it's always important to try to put things in perspective. And this is probably true for all branches of science, and even for the highest branches, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and everything that we rely upon for our well-being. But you know, this is the difference between academia, I believe, and the hoi polloi, and the ones who are not academics. We're trying to both to understand where we come from, how a mode of reasoning stemmed from, you know, in my case, a rereading of history, the putting together of events that were not seen that way, even by people who were living them, like the 1989, for instance, which I'm sure many of you will say, no, you have it all wrong. You're not a true Czech. It shows, you know, have no idea of what happened in this country at the time. Which, to some extent, allows us to try to foresee the future, for which, you know, only experience shows after you're dead if you have foreseen it for good or have been mistaken. With that, I would like to thank you for your patience, for listening to my bad English, but I have no Czech anyway, and the Czech Republic doesn't care about France, its sister of 1918, but this is where we are, and we have to do with the tools which are at our disposals. So thank you very much, and once again, I'm very proud, even though the animal here is too good for me, it's much more than the animal I am really, a Czech canet from Nadějkov, and my little village in the south of France, which is also a boar, sorry, sanglier, c'est boar, canets hunter. So we've been eating canets meat in my family since the megalithic times from all parts. So this is why I was resilient and was able to resist both the death sentence by ISIS and, more than everything, the hatred of my colleagues. So thank you very much, and I'm at your disposal to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Kepel, cher Gilles, for your analysis. We have about half an hour for a discussion, so please do not hesitate to present your comments or questions. Please, go ahead.
So, Professor Kepel, thank you very much for coming to Prague. I'm a very big fan. I've been reading your books ever since I could read French. So I'm familiar with your work. And I would like to ask you about, there's this sort of apparent phenomenon in the West, especially in France and the UK, where we're seeing this alliance almost between left-wing and one would say extreme left parties and Islamic, Muslim or Islamist elements within society, you know, LFI in France or the Greens in the UK. There's a joke that the Greens are called the Greens no longer
green,
because...
yeah. Green or green, yeah.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think the comparison that is being made increasingly between what's happening today and what happened in revolutionary Iran, I mean, i.e. the cooperation and the subsequent elimination of the leftists by the Islamists, do you think is it justifiable to compare the two situations?
Thank you. It's a very important question, and I'm not sure I have the answer, but let me underline something. Like right after October 7th, 2023, more or less like what had happened after the 9/11, many people in the Arab world and sympathizers of Islam remained mum for a while, because there are so many people dead in the Twin Towers. And I remember I was in Egypt at the time, traveled a lot in the Middle East, and people would say it's not us, it's the Israelis, so that the blame could be put on the Arabs. And there was a famous fax, I don't remember, no one knows what a fax is anymore, that was sent by the heads of the Jews hidden somewhere to Jews who would work on the Twin Towers to say not to go to work on that very day. Of course, this fax was never produced, but it was, And then after October 7th, the magnitude of the massacre, the images, the savagery, and everything that was used, the hostage thing was, at first was, not claimed as. After Netanyahu starting bombing everybody, and so the image was turned upside down, and the survivors of the signs of the survivors of the Holocaust were themselves causing a Holocaust. And so, the image of the Israelis as victims was flipped as, new Nazis to some extent. And this was, of course, something which was extremely detrimental to Israel and whatever people think of Israel. It was a fact. Now, then there was a huge alliance of the extreme left and of Islamic movements, the LFI in France, but worldwide. And this was something that boosted the global South phenomenon, right? The globe, this was a time when people would say the BRICS are just a bunch of countries which have only some level of hatred of the West in common, but not that much. I mean, many of them hate each other more than they hate the West. And in the BRICS you have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran. I don't think that there is much love lost between them for the time being, or Ethiopia and Egypt. Who don't. And so then there was this big issue of Gaza, which became a catchword, and in Britain in particular, a number of Muslim movements had organized already among the Pakistani immigrants, and sort of started to bargain for their votes with the Labour Party. In the 2024 or 5 elections, local elections in Britain, a number of Labour MPs were defeated by Gaza candidates, who had then decided that they were strong enough. And nowadays, and so LFI, La France Insoumise in France, was very strong on that, and actually was capable of having people who usually do not vote do not go to the ballots, whether they be immigrants and university students or college students, to vote. And this is how they built a significant constituency in the European Parliament, where you have a proportional vote in Parliament, and even in the French local elections that took place last month. More and more, it's not yet as public as was the case for the Gaza massacres, if you want, or inflicted by Netanyahu, not the first one. But voices are raising in support of Iran in those same constituencies. Like the Iranians are real men, they resist to American imperialism, and of course the image of Donald Trump is not someone with which many in this room, I imagine, would identify spontaneously. So there's this discrepancy which is growing, and I believe that as it goes, unless the last phase of the blockade, I mean the fact that the Strait of Hormuz was not blocked entirely; it was blocked for enemies of Iran. Nowadays, the American Navy is blocking in the Arabian Sea every ship that has stopped in Iran or the Strait. So they're strangling them economically, and they're also strangling China, which is importing most of its oil from Iran. For the time being, the Chinese have reservations, but big reserves, sorry. But I don't know how long it will last. Anyway, so you have this sort of identification with Iran by a growing number of Muslims and of leftists, even though the biggest victims of the Iranian strikes are the Arab Gulf countries, which is reminiscent to some extent of the Iran-Iraq war of the 1980s. Like you had many, Iraq-Iran, Saddam Hussein war against Saudi Arabia after the Iran-Iraq war. And I remember in France, you had a number of people, mosques who were on the payroll, the Saudis, where the Imam said, "Long live Saddam Hussein." Then after the war, those guys were summoned to Saudi Arabia and said, "What did you declare on that date? And are you still coming from your money? Get out." And so this is one thing that's happening. The other is that in Western countries, or in my own country, I believe that, I don't mean the Czech Republic, but France, Nasledano, Michel. Ah bon, ça va. Therefore, the more the extreme left with the leftist speaks, the more people, the rest of the people, vote for the extreme right. So this creates a polarization. So since I arrived yesterday in Prague, everybody said, we're rid of Orban, right? Get rid of, good. So, okay, but we may not be rid of those people in bigger, more to the West countries because of the split that we have with the sort of Islamo-leftist pole, which has now the upper hand in the universities, for instance. I was ousted from academia 1 year before, what I could, normally I should have gone until 70. But the last year was at the discretion of the president of the university. And under pressure of the Islamo-leftists, they said he has to be out. Not that I'm particularly militant of one camp or another, but I do not, use the doxa leftist or the Islamo-leftists, and this has to be punished and sanctioned. I don't give a damn as far as I'm concerned, but it is quite telling of what happens in academia in Europe or in the West today. So, and it is linked definitely with what happens outside. So we'll see to what extent the sort of the boosting of the lauding the Iranians will develop or not. We'll see if they survive, because you know their economy is really in tatters, and I'm not sure that the Iranian regime can survive for long if it is choked economically. And I'm not sure that China will be in a capacity to intervene, but who knows? You know, because we're, you know, on the brink of abyss. This is why you asked me to make my last lecture and go back to roots, into my Kalishte of origin. Yeah. Mr. President.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your lecture. Let me ask you a question actually related to what you mentioned in the end, and it is the regime in Iran. Somehow, was it, we all know how terrible, murderous it is, and this fact of this revolutionary guards and their history, it must have some kind of influence on what is happening. That is the question.
What is very striking in Iran, you know, I'm an Arabist. I do not speak Farsi. I can read it at times because it's written in Arabic, but there are a number of false friends. When in Iran there's a word in Arabic, it's the secret services, mukhabarat, and in Iranian, in Farsi, istikhbarat means telecommunications. Now, so how come in this country, you know, intelligence services say, hey, this is our office, this was not post and telegraphs, not intelligence, so the faux amis. Therefore, nevertheless, what is very striking is that, for instance, I mean, I don't think that I'm the center of the world. I guess that 2 or 3 of my books have been translated in Arabic, and no one knows about them. In Farsi, most of my books were translated. I didn't know by them because they were translated without any authorization. Anyway, nowadays with AI, it doesn't matter because everything is translated privately and you don't know. There are no translations anymore in terms of regular translations. And they read everything. The Shia view of Islam functions on a sort of dichotomy, which is with the public and private, or visible and hidden, batin or interior, and zahir, explicit, visible. Everything is forbidden under the aegis of the Islamic Republic on the zahir, on the visible. This is entirely controlled and everything. But as a concession, you can do whatever you want in private. Like, you know, they have shifted at times, the real power remains in the hands of the guides and more and more of the revolutionary guards. I will elaborate a little later on that. But you know, so they had sort of progressive or open presidents, and then more reactionary or closed presidents. But it doesn't matter, but the president doesn't have the upper hand. It's the guy who has the upper hand. But they would let a few hundred flowers flourish, as they used to say in China, and then chop them all. So when it flourished, we had visas. We could, you know, and I visited Iran many times. Then you have to leave before they put you in jail as a hostage, right? And I was stunned by the not only the fact that I've attended private parties in Iran that I could never dream of in the West. We are in an academic milieu, so I will give no details. And but also at the extraordinary quality of Iranian research. Not only in literature. I mean, I cannot judge about science, but you know, they have built their A-bomb themselves, with a little help from their friends in North Korea. But you know, nevertheless, much of it was something. The very way of you know, preparing for that war, of thinking way in advance, like, you know, they're chess players by tradition. If it is actually the Iranians that gave the green light to Sinwar in October 2023. At the time, we had no proof, but I was rather of the belief that Sinwar decided on his own, that it was his hubris, and that the consequences were terrible. Like Hezbollah was destroyed. Well, Hezbollah was not destroyed. It was destroyed but rebuilt immediately. But the image of Israel is destroyed for good. You know, Netanyahu is perceived as the epitome of Israel, like Donald Trump is perceived as the epitome of the US, which is not great for their access to the public opinion worldwide. And if that is the case, if they had prepared for the Israeli attack, they had disseminated the drone launches everywhere. They had already planned to attack everything in the Gulf countries, and you know, and they had built it on, you know, on an understanding of the poor man's weapon, the drone technology. If such is the case, this is quite impressive at their capacity to build. You say the Nazis did the same, you know, after Hitler seized power. I mean, the desire to take revenge of the sanctions imposed by the French and the Brits, but was such that you know, they would not be defeated. But nowadays, I believe that the system, the political system of the Islamic Republic has changed. Originally, the leader, or as they say, the leader of Rahbar, or the guide, had to be a cleric. It's actually it's the Iranian learned society's academy that rules Iran to some extent, except that it's the clerical learned society. So it's you. This is why you should like Iran, because it's us in power, but you have to do religion as part of your curriculum, of course. And you know, Shia theology is academic. So it's not like Sunnis. I mean, if we say that you are our imam, and we are a community, no one, unless we are destroyed as a community because we're a bunch of heretics, no one can say that our child. But in Shia Islam, you have to go through exams, you have to give proof of your being learned, you have to write a PhD, which is scrutinized in theology, which is scrutinized by your... And then there is a hierarchy of knowledge and of erudition. Khomeini actually was not the best and the oldest, but he used the revolution to be promoted. So you see, academia is terrible. You know. And then Khamenei, but he was an Ayatollah, which is more or less a cardinal, or say a university professor, which is the real thing which counts. Then Khamenei was only a lecturer or something. He was not Ayatollah. He was promoted Ayatollah. He was Hujjat al-Islam, which is below, by the political system. His son, Mujtaba, was, you know, the guys who would open the door, clean the toilet, and whatever in a university. We say in French, à terre, no, technical personnel. But he was promoted as the supreme leader. actually, he is a pasdar. He's a revolutionary guard with a clerical robe. He's not really a cleric, okay? And therefore, what this shows is that the regime has been increasingly militarized. And, you know, even if you listen to them, a reference to Islam is more perfunctory than anything, you know? But nevertheless, it's a useful tool. But it's more important than drones as of today, whereas in the past it was more balanced.
There is a question by Professor Lomova. It will probably be the last one, I'm afraid.
Last, but by
Thank
no
you.
means
Thank
least,
you.
of course.
Thank you for the talk. I was fascinated by the historical and space network you charted in front of our eyes. And I thought there is still one important event in early 1979 which you did not mention, and I would be curious about it. And this is the full normalization of political relations, diplomatic relations between China and the United States. Continuing the previous rapprochement and actually anti-Soviet effort. So I would like to know, how would you place this event, which happened a little bit more to the east, in the
Global analysis.
and particularly the Middle East and the Soviet Union?
Thank you very much for this big challenge. How many hours do I have to deal with that? 2 minutes, okay, so 2 hours would have been a minimum, but then I would have to, plus documentation, because I don't have it at hand. I can't do that just like that. No, thank you. It's a very wise remark, I think. I had not thought about it in the way you mentioned, which I should have. When Nixon went to China, clearly what he had in mind was to undermine the Soviet Union and build a relationship with someone whose growth he would help, not to imagine that he would be his worst enemy, worse than the Soviet Union. Well, we academics know that very well, because I've spent my time looking for grants, positions for my former PhD students who, on the day they got the final job, took a knife out of their sock and tried to stab me in the back, chanting Allahu Akbar or anything else. So we should never be too good to our students. Something I unfortunately never applied to myself, and this is how miserably I ended. But this is, I don't know, I don't think that at the time Nixon should be learned. I mean, you should sponsor a research on that. Now that you have provoked me, you know, you have to go to the end of or the consequences of your provocation. This is not something I believe they thought about. Originally, the Chinese were very anti-Islamic because they had this Uyghur problem. And, you know, the Uyghurs were persecuted because they would not want to assimilate into Han, and also they had the Hui, Chinese Muslims, who were looked at suspiciously. Now they are being used as ambassadors of China in the Muslim world, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that this had been foreseen at the time. When you think of the One Belt, One Road initiative, I mean, this is something which, or the old Silk Roads, I mean, this is something that traces back to extraordinary things, that the Chinese are now controlling not only the land road from China to Europe, but also the sea roads and the straits. And from then the Malacca Strait, after the Malacca Straits, you have the Hormuz Straits, and then the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that goes to Europe and through the Suez Canal. And this is definitely a sort of long-term return of history, which is happening. To what extent had Nixon or his advisors, because I don't think Nixon had any idea about that, did they have that in mind? I don't know. I mean, you should find funding for a Czech student to go and look at the archives. I don't know whether they're declassified already, but it would be definitely interesting. I don't know. Which is the only thing that an academic should say.
The most honest. Thank you again. We can continue the discussion in the room next to this. The Land Society of the Czech Republic is offering a glass of wine to everyone, so please don't hesitate to stay a bit longer and discuss with Professor Kepel. So thank you again.
It will be the contribution of Moravia to there is no wine in Nadějkov, unfortunately.
Monsieur Professor, and thank to all of you for coming and having comments, having questions, and please stay a bit more if you can.
Děkuji.
Have a nice evening.